Question number one. What is your understanding of the word globalization? My understanding of the word globalization is the process, whether it be negative or positive, connecting everybody in the world through trade, transportation, communication technology, and the media. Question number two. Which historical legacies of globalization have had the greatest impact on our world today? The historical legacies of globalization I believe to have had the greatest impact on our world today would be the British East India Company and their military control over India, and the Berlin Conference and the scramble for Africa. I chose the British East India Company to demonstrate that out of a bad thing can come a good thing. The British East India Company was sent to control the trade of India. They quickly became very powerful, aligning with Indian rulers who made sure the Indian people did what they were told. The company became so powerful with the monopoly of Indian goods that they enlisted their own army to enforce their rules. With the British in charge, India was sent into a time of deindustrialization because they were not allowed to spin their own cotton to make cloth with. This cotton spinning had been the staple of the Indian economy up until this point. At this point, they were forced to buy British made cotton so the British could get money and not have to compete with Indian produced cotton, which was hurting them because it was better produced. Gandhi was a lawyer, and he spent many of the years in his 20s and 30s in South Africa protecting the rights of Indian people who had been sent there to do labor. They were scrutinized because of the color of their skin. Gandhi first realized the scrutiny of Indian people when he tried to board a train on first class and was kicked off because of the color of his skin. When Gandhi returned to India, he was a strong believer in a Hindu word called Swadeshi. Swadeshi translates into English meaning self-sufficiency. Gandhi believed that the way India could achieve freedom from British rule was to completely boycott British-made goods and only buy Indian-made goods and produce their own goods. Gandhi was also a strong believer in peaceful protest and never resorting to violence. When the Indian people were under the rule of the British Crown, they only peacefully protested. They never resorted to violence, even after a large group of them were massacred while peacefully gathering because the British East India Company made it against the law because they were scared of the revolution happening. They kept being peaceful and listened to what Gandhi was saying about being self-sustainable, and they didn't buy British-made goods, and they wove their own cotton, made their own clothes. So in the end, they ended up costing the British more to be a colony than they were making from India. So after a long time, the British Crown finally realized that they could not deter the way of all these people, so they finally gave India their freedom. When India gained their independence, the region that was once under control of the East India Company was turned into three separate countries: India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, against what Gandhi has what Gandhi asked for. When they split these regions up, war broke out between India and Pakistan over what land was theirs. Uh, Once Gandhi heard the news of this, he went on a hunger strike and they stopped fighting. But to this day, there's an area in northern India called Kashmir that is still fought over for whose it is. Part of it is in control of India, and part of it is in control of Pakistan. The main problem is both of these countries do have nuclear weapons. So if it does escalate to that, that will not be very good. So let's hope it doesn't. The positive effect on the world that came out of India's independence was the idea of a peaceful protest to get what you want. The peaceful protest has since been used many times with many varying results. Some examples of where it was used was in America in the 1960s with the civil rights movement when African Americans tried to be considered equal to whites. They did not retaliate to anything that the white people did to them. They just let it happen because they knew it was the only way that things could change. More recently, the technique was used in the Arab Spring to bring the fall of the regimes that were not very fair. It has led to many democracies formed, but it has also led to democracies that have been formed and have also crumbled and formed another dictatorship, like in Egypt. My second case study is the Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference was held in 1884, and it was held to decide which European powers got what parts of Africa. The Scramble of Africa, as it was called, started when King Leopold II of Belgium claimed all the lands that drained into the Congo River were his. He claimed the land so that he could harvest rubber from the indigenous rubber tree. He wanted to harvest this rubber for the new need of rubber for bicycle tires, motorcycle tires, and automobile tires. The indigenous people of Africa were used as slave labor to harvest the natural resources of Africa. This not only included rubber, but it included mining for ores and other stuff. After the European superpowers went through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II, very few of them could afford to hold on to their African colonies anymore. These African colonies were considered their summer home in some sort, and when times are tough, you can't really afford a vacation home. When they left the African colonies, they usually chose who would be put in charge. This caused many problems because each country was very basically drawn up at the time of the Berlin Conference with no real understanding of indigenous tribes and religions. Each country had so many of these tribes that some got along and some did not, that it caused many problems after their freedom from the European colonies. The problems that I will be talking about are South Africa and their struggle with apartheid, and the and Rwanda and their genocide. In 1926, the British Empire allowed South Africa to become an independent dominion of the British Empire. To maintain the power that the white people, the colonists, had in South Africa, they were put into positions of power, even though they were at the time outnumbered 10 to 1, and they were given laws to uh, protect their power by not allowing black people to vote and not allowing black people to hold positions that were powerful, and they were not allowed to live in nicer communities. They had their own separate areas. After World War II, uh, the blacks of South Africa demanded their independence, and they wanted their own government for themselves to run. After they set these demands, they were only met with new laws of apartheid. Uh, Apartheid enacted legislation that strictly segregated the population. Blacks were forced to use different uh, public amenities. They had separate washrooms, they had separate schools, and they had separate housing subdivisions. The white subdivisions being much nicer than the black subdivisions. Black people were less educated because the government spent less money on them. In 1984, a study was done. They were spending 2,538 rands to educate a white child, while only spending 504 to educate a black child of the same age. They purposely did this to keep the black people less educated so they would not question what was happening to them. It's kind of the same thing that the Taliban are doing to women, because knowledge is the worst enemy in their cases. A shocking statistic to show just how poorly educated the black people of South Africa were is that only 32% of blacks were literate, while 93% of the whites were. Fed up with the unjustness of the education system and the whole government, uh, between 15,000 and 20,000 high school students on June 16th, 1976, took to the street in a town called Soweto to protest for equal education. Police opened fire on the students, killing a reported 350, according to the town, and the government only reported 168 killed. The news of the killings went worldwide, and everyone called for the end of apartheid. In 1986, the South African government ended apartheid after increasing pressure from the international community. The international community pressured them by using tactics such as trade restrictions with the country, and even the pop stars of the day joined together to produce a song called Ain't Gonna Play Sun City. Sun City was a resort in South Africa that was played by these pop stars of the day. The pop stars created this song to spread the word of what was happening in South Africa much wider than, say, the news would, because not a lot of young people listen and watch the news. In 1994, the country held their first free and democratic election uh, where everyone who was a citizen could vote no matter what their skin color was. In a landslide victory, Nelson Mandela won the election. Nelson Mandela was previously put in jail for alleged war, no, alleged, alleged treason. He was, he really had no affiliation. He had just joined the treason that Nelson Mandela was charged with was because he spoke against apartheid publicly and was a main figurehead in trying to free the black people of South Africa. When Nelson Mandela was voted in, he enacted the Truth and Reconciliations Act that helped the victims of apartheid. My second case study is the genocide that happened in Rwanda. Before this, before the scramble for Africa, Rwanda, well, the area that is now considered Rwanda, was made up of two traditional indigenous groups. These indigenous groups, the main two, were the Hutus and the Tutsi. They lived in a peaceful coexistence with each other. The Tutsi were the farmers, traditionally higher up in social class, and the Hutus being more of the laborers. The two cultures were not that different, and if you were Hutu and you worked hard enough, you could even eventually become a Tutsi. Germany was the first European power to colonize Rwanda, and when they did, they noticed that the Tutsi were lighter skinned, taller, and had less of a prominent nose, so they thought they were more like a European and therefore more intelligent, so they put them in charge of the government. When these two social classes were made after Germany uh, colonized them, they were now very different, with the Tutsis now being in control and the Hutus being not in control anymore. Not that they really ever were, they're just less equal, and there was no moving classes. After World War One, Germany was blamed for causing it, and they had to repay everything that they did wrong. Uh, Part of this was liquidating their assets, and Rwanda was one of their assets. In the Treaty of Versailles, um, Rwanda was given to Belgium, who only made the social classes more and more distinct, forcing citizens to carry little identification cards around to show if you were either Tutsi or Hutu. The Tutsi were treated better and could have better jobs than the Hutu. Uh, this only made the two cultures hate each other and further their dislike for each other. After World War II, like many African colonies did, Rwanda demanded their independence. And in 1962, the Belgians left Rwanda, leaving them to put up their own government. Uh, there was an election held, but before the election, the two groups were in conflict over who would end up controlling the country. So they called an election to do it fairly. Uh, After the election, the majority Hutus took control of the government. This caused tensions to escalate because the Tutsi had always been in control, and the Hutus were very unaware at how to run a country. The tension eventually escalated to full-out fighting between the Hutus and the Tutsis, causing many Tutsis to flee the country. Slowly, the Hutu government became less and less popular. They just didn't really know how to run a country very well. And in 1990, the Tutsi Rwandan Patriotic Front came from a refugee camp in Uganda to reclaim the country that they believed was theirs. In response to this, the Rwandan army started to arm Hutu civilians. These civilians later became known as the Interahamwe. Hutu broadcasts were broadcasted all over the country, declaring the Tutsi as evil and scum of the earth, and that they should all be dead. War broke out between both sides. But in 1993, Rwandan Habiram, I apologize for the butchering of the name, but you know who he is, and leaders from the Rwandan Patriotic Front signed a peace agreement. This brought an end to the fighting that had been going on. After the peace agreement had been signed, the United Nations sent in a group of peacekeepers just to make sure things didn't get out of hand again. The peacekeeping corps was led by Canadian Romeo Dallaire. Mr. Dallaire, wanted the UN warned the UN that tensions had not gone away with the signing of the peace treaty. If anything, they had gotten worse. The UN refused to send more help and even told them not to interfere unless shot upon, and not to retaliate at anything, because it would look like the UN was choosing sides between either the Hutu and the Tutsi. The anti-Tutsi broadcasts were still continuing on the radio, and Romeo Dallaire heard all of them. He saw that the tension had not gone away, and that even the Interahamwe were stockpiling weapons in mass amounts. But he could not do anything about this because the UN had refused permission for him to do anything. On April 6th, 1994, the president of Rwanda's plane was shot down above the runway. Nobody to this day knows who actually shot it down. The Hutus blamed the Tutsi, and the Tutsis blamed the Hutu because they believed that he was a Tutsi sympathizer. On the night of April 6th, 1994, the Hutu started raiding people's homes and finding Tutsi and Tutsi sympathizers and started massacring them. Men, women, and children started dying. by the Rwandan army and the intern Hamwe. Most of the killing was done with a machete. People fled to churches and UN buildings to find refuge, but in the end, these ended up being the worst possible places for them to go, with them being trapped inside for these buildings to become killing fields. In the 4 months that followed, between an estimated 800,000 and 1 million people were killed. The genocide finally ended when Rwandan Patriotic Front forces took Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. They created a multi-ethnic government, and now a second wave of refugees has left Rwanda, most of them being of Hutu descent for fear of retaliation by the Tutsi. The international community and the UN have now apologized for not listening to Romeo Dallaire and his pleads for help when he saw all this was happening. They have since understood what genocide is, and they are trying to take steps to prevent it in the future. Rwanda is still trying to cope from the tragedies that happened by setting up organizations like Aviga Agozo to help Rwandan women who lost their families and houses. This allows these women to just get money to afford to live because they have no other ways. Question number 3. What aspect of economic globalization should we be most concerned about? The aspect of economic globalization that I believe we should be most concerned about is the way we exploit our fellow human to make goods that can compete in our marketplace. From unsafe working conditions in developing countries to making a product that is unsafe for the consumers. Transnational corporations are all about making money, and the way to make money is to make your goods the cheapest. With minimum wage going up in more developed countries, they could not turn the type of profit they want to have. So, to allow for this profit, they have started outsourcing their labor to make goods cheaper. Items now are made in sweatshops all over the world, with the majority of them being in Asia or Central and South America. The working conditions in these shops are absolutely terrible, with factories competing to make the goods for the cheapest. This leads to very low wages and very unsafe and unhealthy working conditions. On April 24, 2013, an 8-story garment factory in the outskirts of Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka, cracks were found to be forming in the building the day before the collapse happened. All the residents and the businesses were told to evacuate, all except the garment workers. When the building collapsed, 1,129 workers died and 2,515 workers were injured. 29 brands of clothing were manufactured there. 5 companies refused to compensate and take blame for their actions. The most noticeable of these transnationals not to sign was Walmart. In a study done by the American National Labor Committee, it found that NBA jerseys were sewn by women who only made 24 cents per jersey they sewed, when each one retails for $140. The United Nations found that up to 85% of sweatshop workers were female, and that many of their employers forced them to take birth control and routine pregnancy tests so they could avoid providing maternity leave and health benefits. Transnational corporations will do anything to make money, including harming the consumer, even children. In 1997, a CSI forensics lab kit, a children's toy, was found in the fingerprint dust to contain up to 7% tremolite. Tremolite is one of the most poisonous types of asbestos known to man. Only one exposure of tremolite is needed to cause lung disease and mesothelioma later in life. Toys R Us and other suppliers continued to sell this toy after this was first noticed by an independent review. They continued to sell these products because the Chinese manufacturer conducted its own test and decided there was no asbestos in it. Transnational corporations will do anything to make a dollar. That may include harming people you know nothing about and probably will never meet, or that could include harming you. What's it going to take to stop them? No. Question number 4. In my opinion, can we be both prosperous and sustainable? I believe at the rate we are using our resources and destroying the earth, we cannot be both prosperous and sustainable, unless the world as a whole decides to make some very drastic changes. We are facing many challenges, some of which are deforestation, pollution, low food supplies, and overpopulation. We are cutting down our forests at an alarming rate to create more farmland, housing areas, and lumber. The trees we are cutting down are not able to repopulate the earth quick enough to reduce the carbon emissions that we are also letting off into the atmosphere. So it's reducing the amount of clean air we have. Air pollution. Every bit of it goes up into the atmosphere, eating away at the ozone layer or trapping sun rays in the Earth's atmosphere, all creating harmful UV rays and global warming. Ground pollution. The leaching of chemicals into the ground pollutes our groundwater, fresh water supply, and just the ground. So it creates polluted soil, so crops can't grow as well. Animals can't live in there. Kills insects. Oil spills, like the British Petroleum one that leaked thousands of barrels, if not millions, of barrels of oil into the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico. This spill killed many aquatic animals, and aquatic animals have now been tied to allowing us to live because they keep themselves in balance, allowing for the creation of most of the Earth's oxygen to happen. So if they die, that's not good. And that's when another problem, such as shark finning, raises itself because it increases the population of fish who eat algae and plankton and stuff, which do create uh, more oxygen than all the world's forests combined. With all the climate changes that are happening nowadays, it creates very drastic weather changes that can lead to droughts, and conditions perfect for insects. These uh, destroy crops uh, and fields because the ground is unsuitable to grow in because it is so dry, or the insects such as grasshoppers or any other insects that eat crops thrive in the dry conditions and love to eat the crops. Um, Many people rely on these crops as their main food source because they can't afford meat because meat's very expensive, or they don't have enough water to feed livestock. This phenomenon of drought and low food stocks is not just a thing that happens in Africa, it happens all over the world, including places in North America like California. Um, if you're in a less developed country, you'll have a much harder time than we would finding extra food to eat because you don't have the money to pay for it and it's just not around as much as we have. A main problem of this is the North American idea of overly large proportions and fast food and high fructose corn syrup and everything that just we don't need. Another problem is overpopulation, and it's just going to continue happening unless we find a way to slow it down. Uh, Main reasons behind overpopulation are either lack of contraception or unwillingness to use contraception based on preconceived ideas of what it does to you, which are all scientifically wrong, or it's against their religious uh, uh, against the religion. Yeah. Um, Another problem is in some cultures having more children uh, is seen as making a man stronger. The more children he has, the more virile he is seen to be, and therefore he perceives himself as the alpha male, and no one is stronger than him. These are just a few of the many reasons we are on a slow, well, actually not so slow, more of a very, very fast crash course in straight into the ground. I believe if we do make enough changes, we can be both prosperous and sustainable, but we will have to change a lot of stuff and rely more on science. But that's really the only way to not have the end of the human race as we know it. Question number 5. Based on my lifestyle, what responsibilities do I believe my generation will be asked to fulfill in order to make our world a better place? I believe that based on my lifestyle, which admittedly is very lavish, even though I try not to do as many things I do wrong as I do, I try to be eco friendly, but it's very, very hard sometimes. Because of my lifestyle, I believe that my generation is going to be taxed with the possibility of the biggest task you can imagine. That task, I believe, is going to be saving the human race. Well, this may seem exaggerated. I feel as though it is not that far out of the realm of possibility. Um, as of right now, even with all the changes we've made to being green and eco friendly, we are still free falling off a face of a cliff with no parachute, about to hit the ground. Uh, the main reason behind this is the fact that we live in an oil based world. Oil is not a sustainable resource, and when we use it for whatever we're using it for, we are also in the process of killing the earth. We are going to have to figure out how to reverse the damages done by us. Um, we will have to figure out a new and hopefully clean and sustainable energy source that we can use and eliminate the need for oil. Um, we will have to be more ingenuitive when we build cities, places, just ideas will have to be more ingenuitive. We'll have to find ways to stop, reduce, and uh, reverse pollution. We'll have to figure out ways to reduce the growth of the human population because as of now, we cannot sustain a population the size we do have already, with everyone being equal and fair. But possibly the hardest problem we will have to face and come up with a way to do it is equality. And I don't know if we can ever conquer equality fully. If we really want to change the way we are and make the earth a better place, we need to become a fair and equal society where nobody is considered better than anyone else and everyone has the same as everyone else. This may be exactly the same principle as Karl Marx's communism. But there's a problem with communism, and that is the problem with humans. The fact that we are driven by greed, and we will always want to be better than everyone else around us, and that'll never change as far as I can tell. It is nature in its very essence. Survival of the fittest, as some would say. Lions only have one pride leader, and he got there for killing the rest of them that stood in his way. The stellar sea lion has one dominant male for hundreds and hundreds of females, and he beats up everyone who challenges him and just repopulates. Humans try to do the same thing, but now it is less of a animalistic ideology and more of a I want to have more than you, but more now is money, power, and just stuff like that. The more money you have, the more respect you have, and the more respect you have, the more money you can earn. So it's pretty much a endless loop. So if you get in it, you're stuck in it. We even go so far to screwing over, killing, doing horrible things to our own man just to get more and more money. So we have, like, for instance, we have people making less than $1 a day living in this world, and we also have probably plenty of people making more than, I don't know, $1 million a day living in today's society. And some of them are very good and uh, donate to the poor and needy and starving and stuff. But some, like uh, the owners of Walmart, they don't really see the point in doing that, so they just keep it all for themselves. This idea of doing whatever you can for money is what is driving us to our doom. So I don't believe we can actually give up capitalism ever, even though if it will kill us. So let's hope we figure out some scientific way to make us sustainable. Question number 6. Find 2 quotes you think reflect your attitude towards globalization. Explain how each quotes give insight to your perspective. 2 quotes I found to express my thoughts on globalization are: number 1 being from John B. Larson. Globalization is not a monolithic force, but an evolving set of consequences, some good, some bad, and some unintended. It is the new reality. That is my quote. I chose this quote to express my feelings about globalization because it just expresses my feelings about globalization. The good being the goods and services that we get for much, much cheaper and much more readily available than they would be without globalization. They may not even exist without globalization. Most of them wouldn't exist without globalization. The bad is the exploitation that occurs with globalization. It's uh, caused many developing countries who can't afford the same luxuries that we have to have a minimum wage or workers' regulation laws or anything like that, to create unsafe buildings, work conditions that lead to the collapse in Bangladesh that killed 1,000 people, more than that. Um, it also leads to pollution of the earth because they don't have regulated waste management systems. So things like shipbreaking happen, and all those toxic chemicals from the ships just leach out into the ocean, to our food, possibly. So don't eat any fish for a while. Uh, it also, oh, never mind. Uh, the unintended problems. These are the unknowns that we have either done and just don't know about so far, or things we're going to do to our Earth in the future. Examples of these unknowns are the use of DDT so liberally not so long ago without known consequences of what it does to the ecosystem. Another one would be the use of CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons in items like hairspray and other propellant things, which is actually one of the most ozone eating chemicals out there, and it destroys our ozone layer up in the atmosphere, and we had no idea. But the only way we figured out that these problems do actually exist is through globalization. So it all wraps around back to the good again. And probably the only way we will ever fix the bad will also be globalization. Everything comes back to globalization. My second quote is from Fujio Mitorio. He said, diversification and globalization are the keys to the future. This reflects my thoughts on globalization because uh, it really is the future. It's been the past and it's done many bad things, many good things, but it's going to happen more, and it let's hope it happens better than it has been happening, and we keep progress. Um, we do this by creating more technology and enhancing our intellectual knowledge. We reintroduced, for example, we reintroduced the idea of an electric car after it had been destroyed by the petroleum industry and major car manufacturers for hundreds of years, not hundreds, like about 100 years, from like the 1890s till now, around that area. Um, we It's also led to ideas like social media, which has made Twitter possible, Facebook, Instagram, and the most powerful hashtag that has now led people to spread ideas around the world who may have never met before or may have never had a voice before this was made by globalization. And now they are standing up to the problems that they see in the world and trying to make a brighter tomorrow happen all by themselves. And all this progression was led to globalization, the exact same thing they are protesting.